Chapter 2.3 of the 9/11 Commission Report. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The 9/11 Commission Report, Chapter 2.3. The Rise of Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, 1988 through 1992. A decade of conflict in Afghanistan, from 1979 to 1989, gave Islamist extremists a rallying point and training field. A communist government in Afghanistan gained power in 1978, but was unable to establish enduring control. At the end of 1979, the Soviet government sent in military units to ensure that the country would remain securely under Moscow's influence. The response was an Afghan national resistance movement that defeated Soviet forces. Young Muslims from around the world flocked to Afghanistan to join as volunteers in what was seen as a holy war, jihad, against an invader. The largest numbers came from the Middle East. Some were Saudis, and among them was Usama Bin Laden. 23 when he arrived in Afghanistan in 1980, Bin Laden was the 17th of 57 children of a Saudi construction magnate. 6'5" and thin, Bin Laden appeared to be ungainly, but was in fact quite athletic, skilled as a horseman, runner, climber, and soccer player. He had attended Abdulaziz University in Saudi Arabia. By some accounts he had been interested there in religious studies, inspired by tape recordings of fiery sermons by Abdullah Azzam, a Palestinian and a disciple of Qutb. Bin Laden was conspicuous among the volunteers, not because he showed evidence of religious learning, but because he had access to some of his family's huge fortune. Though he took part in at least one actual battle, he became known chiefly as a person who generously helped fund the anti-Soviet jihad. Bin Laden understood better than most of the volunteers the extent to which the continuation and eventual success of the jihad in Afghanistan depended on an increasingly complex, almost worldwide organization. This organization included a financial support network that came to be known as the Golden Chain, put together mainly by financiers in Saudi Arabia and the Persian Gulf states. Donations flowed through charities or other non-governmental organizations, NGOs. Bin Laden and the Afghan Arabs drew largely on funds raised by this network, whose agents roamed the world markets to buy arms and supplies for the Mujahideen, or holy warriors. Mosques, schools, and boarding houses served as recruiting stations in many parts of the world, including the United States. Some were set up by Islamic extremists or their financial backers. Bin Laden had an important part in this activity. He and the cleric Azzam had joined in creating a Bureau of Services, Metab al-Khidmat, or MAK, which channeled recruits into Afghanistan. The international environment for Bin Laden's efforts was ideal. Saudi Arabia and the United States supplied billions of dollars worth of secret assistance to rebel groups in Afghanistan fighting the Soviet occupation. This assistance was funneled through Pakistan. The Pakistani Military Intelligence Service, Inter Services Intelligence Directorate, or ISID, helped train the rebels and distribute the arms. But Bin Laden and his comrades had their own sources of support and training, and they received little or no assistance from the United States. April 1988 brought victory for the Afghan jihad. Moscow declared it would pull its military forces out of Afghanistan within the next 9 months. As the Soviets began their withdrawal, the jihad's leaders debated what to do next. Bin Laden and Azzam agreed that the organization successfully created for Afghanistan should not be allowed to dissolve. They established what they called a base or foundation, Al-Qaeda, as a potential general headquarters for future jihad. Though Azzam had been considered number one in the MAK, by August 1988, Bin Laden was clearly the leader, emir, of Al-Qaeda. This organization's structure included as its operating arms an intelligence component, a military committee, a financial committee, a political committee, and the committee in charge of media affairs and propaganda. It also had an advisory council, Shura, made up of Bin Laden's inner circle. Bin Laden's assumption of the helm of Al Qaeda was evidence of his growing self confidence and ambition. He soon made clear his desire for unchallenged control and for preparing the Mujahideen to fight anywhere in the world. Azam, by contrast, favored continuing to fight in Afghanistan until it had a true Islamist government, and, as a Palestinian, he saw Israel as the top priority for the next stage. Whether the dispute was about power, personal differences, or strategy, it ended on November 24, 1989, when a remotely controlled car bomb killed Azam and both of his sons. The killers were assumed to be rival Egyptians. The outcome left Bin Laden indisputably in charge of what remained of the MAK and Al Qaeda. Through writers like Qutb and the presence of the Egyptian Islamist teachers in the Saudi educational system, Islamists already had a strong intellectual influence on Bin Laden and his Al Qaeda colleagues. By the late 1980s, the Egyptian Islamist movement, badly battered in the government crackdown following President Sadat's assassination, was centered in two major organizations, the Islamic Group and the Egyptian Islamic Jihad. A spiritual guide for both, but especially the Islamic Group, was the so-called Blind Sheikh, Omar Abdel Rahman. His preaching had inspired the assassination of Sadat. After being in and out of Egyptian prisons during the 1980s, Abdel Rahman found refuge in the United States. From his headquarters in Jersey City, he distributed messages calling for the murder of unbelievers. The most important Egyptian in Bin Laden's circle was a surgeon, Ayman al-Zawahiri, who led a strong faction of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad. Many of his followers became important members in the new organization, and his own close ties with Bin Laden led many to think of him as the deputy head of Al Qaeda. He would in fact become Bin Laden's deputy some years later, when they merged their organizations. Bin Laden moves to Sudan. By the fall of 1989, Bin Laden had sufficient stature among Islamic extremists that a Sudanese political leader, Hassan al-Turabi, urged him to transplant his whole organization to Sudan. Turabi headed the National Islamic Front in a coalition that had recently seized power in Khartoum. Bin Laden agreed to help Turabi in an ongoing war against African Christian separatists in southern Sudan, and also to do some road building. Turabi in return would let Bin Laden use Sudan as a base for worldwide business operations and for preparations for jihad. While agents of Bin Laden began to buy property in Sudan in 1990, Bin Laden himself moved from Afghanistan back to Saudi Arabia. In August 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. Bin Laden, whose efforts in Afghanistan had earned him celebrity and respect, proposed to the Saudi monarchy that he summon mujahideen for a jihad to retake Kuwait. He was rebuffed, and the Saudis joined the U.S.-led coalition. After the Saudis agreed to allow U.S. armed forces to be based in the kingdom, Bin Laden and a number of Islamic clerics began to publicly denounce the arrangement. The Saudi government exiled the clerics and undertook to silence Bin Laden by, among other things, taking away his passport. With help from a dissident member of the royal family, he managed to get out of the country under the pretext of attending an Islamic gathering in Pakistan in April 1991. By 1994, the Saudi government would freeze his financial assets and revoke his citizenship. He no longer had a country he could call his own. Bin Laden moved to Sudan in 1991 and set up a large and complex set of intertwined business and terrorist enterprises. In time, the former would encompass numerous companies and a global network of bank accounts and non-governmental institutions. Fulfilling his bargain with Turabi, Bin Laden used his construction company to build a new highway from Khartoum to Port Sudan on the Red Sea coast. Meanwhile, al-Qaeda finance officers and top operatives used their positions in Bin Laden's business to acquire weapons, explosives, and technical equipment for terrorist purposes. One founding member, Abu Hajir al-Iraqi, used his position as head of a Bin Laden investment company to carry out procurement trips from Western Europe to the Far East. Two others, Wadi al-Hagi and Mubarak Duri, who had become acquainted in Tucson, Arizona, in the late 1980s, went as far afield as China, Malaysia, the Philippines, and the former Soviet states of Ukraine and Belarus. Bin Laden's impressive array of offices covertly provided financial and other support for terrorist activities. The network included a major business enterprise in Cyprus, a services branch in Zagreb, an office of the Benevolence International Foundation in Sarajevo, which supported the Bosnian Muslims in their conflict with Serbia and Croatia, and an NGO in Baku, Azerbaijan, that was employed as well by Egyptian Islamic Jihad, both as a source and conduit for finances and as a support center for the Muslim rebels in Chechnya. He also made use of the already established Third World Relief Agency, TWRA, headquartered in Vienna, whose branch office locations included Zagreb and Budapest. Bin Laden later set up an NGO in Nairobi as a cover for operatives there. Bin Laden now had a vision of himself as head of an international jihad confederation. In Sudan, he established an Islamic Army Shura that was to serve as the coordinating body for the consortium of terrorist groups with which he was forging alliances. It was composed of his own al-Qaeda Shura together with leaders or representatives of terrorist organizations that were still independent. In building this Islamic army, he enlisted groups from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Oman, Algeria, Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, Somalia, and Eritrea. Al-Qaeda also established cooperative but less formal relationships with other extremist groups from these same countries, from the African states of Chad, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, and Uganda, and from the Southeast Asian states of Burma, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Bin Laden maintained connections in the Bosnian conflict as well. The groundwork for a true global terrorist network was being laid. Bin Laden also provided equipment and training assistance to the Moro Islamic Liberation Front in the Philippines, and also to a newly formed Philippine group that called itself the Abu Sayyaf Brigade, after one of the major Afghan jihadist commanders. Al-Qaeda helped Jemaah Islamiyah, JI, a nascent organization headed by Indonesian Islamists, with cells scattered across Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and the Philippines. It also aided a Pakistani group engaged in insurrectionist attacks in Kashmir. In mid-1991, Bin Laden dispatched a band of supporters to the northern Afghanistan border to assist the Tajikistan Islamists in the ethnic conflicts that had been boiling there even before the Central Asian departments of the Soviet Union had become independent states. This pattern of expansion through building alliances extended to the United States. A Muslim organization called Al-Khifa had numerous branch offices, the largest of which was in the Farouk Mosque in Brooklyn. In the mid-1980s, it had been set up as one of the first outposts of Azam and Bin Laden's MAK. Other cities with branches of Al-Khifa included Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Pittsburgh, and Tucson. Al-Khifa recruited American Muslims to fight in Afghanistan. Some of them would participate in terrorist actions in the United States in the early 1990s and in Al-Qaeda's operations elsewhere, including the 1998 attacks on U.S. embassies in East Africa. End of chapter 2.3.
Chapter 2.4 of the 9/11 Commission Report. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The 9/11 Commission Report, Chapter 2.4, Building an Organization Declaring War on the United States, 1992 through 1996. Bin Laden began delivering diatribes against the United States before he left Saudi Arabia. He continued to do so after he arrived in Sudan. In early 1992, the al-Qaeda leadership issued a fatwa calling for jihad against the Western occupation of Islamic lands, specifically singling out U.S. forces for attack. The language resembled that which would appear in Bin Laden's public fatwa in August 1996. In ensuing weeks, Bin Laden delivered an often repeated lecture on the need to cut off the head of the snake. By this time, Bin Laden was well known and a senior figure among Islamist extremists, especially those in Egypt, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Afghanistan-Pakistan border region. Still, he was just one among many diverse terrorist barons. Some of Bin Laden's close comrades were more peers than subordinates. For example, Usama Asmurai, also known as Wali Khan, worked with Bin Laden in the early 1980s and helped him in the Philippines and in Tajikistan. The Egyptian spiritual guide based in New Jersey, the Blind Sheikh, whom Bin Laden admired, was also in the network. Among sympathetic peers in Afghanistan were a few of the warlords still fighting for power and Abu Zubaydah, who helped operate a popular terrorist training camp near the border with Pakistan. There were also rootless but experienced operatives, such as Ramzi Youssef and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who, though not necessarily formal members of someone else's organization, were traveling around the world and joining in projects that were supported by or linked to Bin Laden, the Blind Sheikh, or their associates. In now analyzing the terrorist programs carried out by members of this network, it would be misleading to apply the label al-Qaeda operations too often in these early years. Yet it would also be misleading to ignore the significance of these connections. And in this network, Bin Laden's agenda stood out. While his allied Islamist groups were focused on local battles, such as those in Egypt, Algeria, Bosnia, or Chechnya, Bin Laden concentrated on attacking the far enemy, the United States. Attacks known and suspected. After U.S. troops deployed to Somalia in late 1992, al-Qaeda leaders formulated a fatwa demanding their eviction. In December, bombs exploded at 2 hotels in Aden where U.S. troops routinely stopped en route to Somalia, killing 2, but no Americans. The perpetrators are reported to have belonged to a group from southern Yemen headed by a Yemeni member of Bin Laden's Islamic Army Shura. Some in the group had trained at an al-Qaeda camp in Sudan. Al-Qaeda leaders set up a Nairobi cell and used it to send weapons and training to the Somali warlords battling U.S. forces, an operation directly supervised by al-Qaeda's military leader. Scores of trainers flowed to Somalia over the ensuing months, including most of the senior members and weapons training experts of al-Qaeda's military committee. These trainers were later heard boasting that their assistance led to the October 1993 shoot-down of 2 U.S. Black Hawk helicopters by members of a Somali militia group and to the subsequent withdrawal of U.S. forces in early 1994. In November of 1995, a car bomb exploded outside a Saudi-U.S. joint facility in Riyadh for training the Saudi National Guard. 5 Americans and 2 officials from India were killed. The Saudi government arrested 4 perpetrators who admitted being inspired by Bin Laden. They were promptly executed. Though nothing proves that Bin Laden ordered this attack, U.S. intelligence subsequently learned that al-Qaeda leaders had decided a year earlier to attack a U.S. target in Saudi Arabia, and had shipped explosives to the peninsula for this purpose. Some of Bin Laden's associates later took credit. In June 1996, an enormous truck bomb detonated in the Khobar Towers residential complex in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, that housed U.S. Air Force personnel. 19 Americans were killed and 372 were wounded. The operation was carried out principally, perhaps exclusively, by Saudi Hezbollah, an organization that had received support from the government of Iran. While the evidence of Iranian involvement is strong, there are also signs that al-Qaeda played some role, as yet unknown. In this period, other prominent attacks in which Bin Laden's involvement is at best cloudy are the 1993 bombings of the World Trade Center, a plot that same year to destroy landmarks in New York, and the 1995 Manila air plot to blow up a dozen U.S. airliners over the Pacific. Details on these plots appear in Chapter 3. Another scheme revealed that Bin Laden sought the capability to kill on a mass scale. His business aides received word that a Sudanese military officer, who had been a member of the previous government cabinet, was offering to sell weapons-grade uranium. After a number of contacts were made through intermediaries, the officer set the price at $1.5 million, which did not deter bin Laden. Al-Qaeda representatives asked to inspect the uranium and were shown a cylinder about 3 feet long, and one thought he could pronounce it genuine. Al-Qaeda apparently purchased the cylinder, then discovered it to be bogus. But while the effort failed, it shows what bin Laden and his associates hoped to do. One of the Al-Qaeda representatives explained his mission. It's easy to kill more people with uranium. Bin Laden seemed willing to include in the Confederation terrorists from almost every corner of the Muslim world. His vision mirrored that of Sudan's Islamist leader, Turabi, who convened a series of meetings under the label Popular Arab and Islamic Conference around the time of bin Laden's arrival in that country. Delegations of violent Islamist extremists came from all the groups represented in bin Laden's Islamic Army Shura. Representatives also came from organizations such as the Palestine Liberation Organization, Hamas, and Hezbollah. Turabi sought to persuade Shiites and Sunnis to put aside their divisions and join against the common enemy. In late 1991 or 1992, discussions in Sudan between Al-Qaeda and Iranian operatives led to an informal agreement to cooperate in providing support, even if only training, for actions carried out primarily against Israel and the United States. Not long afterward, senior Al-Qaeda operatives and trainers traveled to Iran to receive training in explosives. In the fall of 1993, another such delegation went to the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon for further training in explosives as well as in intelligence and security. Bin Laden reportedly showed particular interest in learning how to use truck bombs such as the one that had killed 241 U.S. Marines in Lebanon in 1983. The relationship between Al-Qaeda and Iran demonstrated that Sunni Shia divisions did not necessarily pose an insurmountable barrier to cooperation in terrorist operations. As will be described in Chapter 7, Al-Qaeda contacts with Iran continued in ensuing years. Bin Laden was also willing to explore possibilities for cooperation with Iraq, even though Iraq's dictator, Saddam Hussein, had never had an Islamist agenda, save for his opportunistic pose as a defender of the faithful against crusaders during the Gulf War of 1991. Moreover, bin Laden had in fact been sponsoring anti-Saddam Islamists in Iraqi Kurdistan, and sought to attract them into his Islamic army. To protect his own ties with Iraq, Turabi reportedly brokered an agreement that bin Laden would stop supporting activities against Saddam. Bin Laden apparently honored this pledge, at least for a time, although he continued to aid a group of Islamist extremists operating in part of Iraq, Kurdistan, outside of Baghdad's control. In the late 1990s, these extremist groups suffered major defeats by Kurdish forces. In 2001, with bin Laden's help, they reformed into an organization called Ansar al-Islam. There are indications that by then the Iraqi regime tolerated and may have even helped Ansar al-Islam against the common Kurdish enemy. With the Sudanese regime acting as intermediary, bin Laden himself met with a senior Iraqi intelligence officer in Khartoum in late 1994 or early 1995. Bin Laden is said to have asked for space to establish training camps, as well as assistance in procuring weapons, but there is no evidence that Iraq responded to this request. As described below, the ensuing years saw additional efforts to establish connections. Sudan becomes a doubtful haven. Not until 1998 did Al-Qaeda undertake a major terrorist operation of its own, in large part because bin Laden lost his base in Sudan. Ever since the Islamist regime came to power in Khartoum, the United States and other Western governments had pressed it to stop providing a haven for terrorist organizations. Other governments in the region, such as those of Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and even Libya, which were targets of some of these groups, added their own pressure. At the same time, the Sudanese regime began to change. Though Turabi had been its inspirational leader, General Omar al-Bashir, president since 1989, had never been entirely under his thumb. Thus, as outside pressures mounted, Bashir's supporters began to displace those of Turabi. The attempted assassination in Ethiopia of Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak in June 1995 appears to have been a tipping point. The would-be killers, who came from the Egyptian Islamic group, had been sheltered in Sudan and helped by bin Laden. When the Sudanese refused to hand over 3 individuals identified as involved in the assassination plot, the UN Security Council passed a resolution criticizing their inaction and eventually sanctioned Khartoum in April 1996. A clear signal to bin Laden that his days in Sudan were numbered came when the government advised him that it intended to yield to Libya's demands to stop giving sanctuary to its enemies. Bin Laden had to tell the Libyans who had been part of his Islamic army that he could no longer protect them and that they had to leave the country. Outraged, several Libyan members of al-Qaeda and the Islamic Army Shura renounced all connections with him. Bin Laden also began to have serious money problems. International pressure on Sudan, together with strains in the world economy, hurt Sudan's currency. Some of bin Laden's companies ran short of funds. As Sudanese authorities became less obliging, normal costs of doing business increased. Saudi pressures on the bin Laden family also probably took some toll. In any case, bin Laden found it necessary both to cut back his spending and to control his outlays more closely. He appointed a new financial manager whom his followers saw as miserly. Money problems proved costly to bin Laden in other ways. Jamal Ahmed al-Fadl, a Sudanese-born Arab, had spent time in the United States and had been recruited for the Afghan war through the Farouk Mosque in Brooklyn. He had joined al-Qaeda and taken the oath of fealty to bin Laden, serving as one of his business agents. Then bin Laden discovered that Fadl had skimmed about $110,000, and he asked for restitution. Fadl resented receiving a salary of only $500 a month, while some of the Egyptians in al-Qaeda were given $1,200 a month. He defected and became a star informant for the United States. Also testifying about al-Qaeda in a U.S. court was Hossein Kerchou, who told of breaking with bin Laden because of bin Laden's professed inability to provide him with money when his wife needed a cesarean section. In February 1996, Sudanese officials began approaching officials from the United States and other governments, asking what actions of theirs might ease foreign pressure. In secret meetings with Saudi officials, Sudan offered to expel bin Laden to Saudi Arabia and asked the Saudis to pardon him. U.S. officials became aware of these secret discussions certainly by March. Saudi officials apparently wanted bin Laden expelled from Sudan. They had already revoked his citizenship, however, and would not tolerate his presence in their country. And bin Laden may have no longer felt safe in Sudan, where he had already escaped at least one assassination attempt that he believed to have been the work of the Egyptian or Saudi regimes, or both. In any case, on May 19, 1996, bin Laden left Sudan, significantly weakened despite his ambitions and organizational skills. He returned to Afghanistan. End of Chapter 2.4. Recording by Alex Jacoby.
Chapter 5.2 of the 9/11 Commission Report. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Leanne Howlett. The 9/11 Commission Report, Chapter 5.2. The Planes Operation. According to KSM, he started to think about attacking the United States after Yousef returned to Pakistan following the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Like Yousef, KSM reasoned he could best influence U.S. policy by targeting the country's economy. KSM and Yousef reportedly brainstormed together about what drove the U.S. economy. New York, which KSM considered the economic capital of the United States, therefore became the primary target. For similar reasons, California also became a target for KSM. KSM claims that the earlier bombing of the World Trade Center taught him that bombs and explosives could be problematic, and that he needed to graduate to a more novel form of attack. He maintains that he and Yousef began thinking about using aircraft as weapons while working on the Manila Air Bojinka plot, and speculated about striking the World Trade Center and CIA headquarters as early as 1995. Certainly KSM was not alone in contemplating new kinds of terrorist operations. A study reportedly conducted by Atef, while he and bin Laden were still in Sudan, concluded that traditional terrorist hijacking operations did not fit the needs of al-Qaeda because such hijackings were used to negotiate the release of prisoners rather than to inflict mass casualties. The study is said to have considered the feasibility of hijacking planes and blowing them up in flight, paralleling the Bojinka concept. Such a study, if it actually existed, yields significant insight into the thinking of al-Qaeda's leaders. 1. They rejected hijackings aimed at gaining the release of imprisoned comrades as too complex, because al-Qaeda had no friendly countries in which to land a plane and then negotiate. 2. They considered the bombing of commercial flights in mid-air, as carried out against Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, a promising means to inflict massive casualties. And 3. They did not yet consider using hijacked aircraft as weapons against other targets. KSM has insisted to his interrogators that he always contemplated hijacking and crashing large commercial aircraft. Indeed, KSM describes a grandiose original plan: a total of 10 aircraft to be hijacked, 9 of which would crash into targets on both coasts. They included those eventually hit on September 11th, plus CIA and FBI headquarters, nuclear power plants, and the tallest buildings in California and the state of Washington. KSM himself was to land the 10th plane at a U.S. airport, and after killing all adult male passengers on board and alerting the media, deliver a speech excoriating U.S. support for Israel, the Philippines, and repressive governments in the Arab world. Beyond KSM's rationalizations about targeting the U.S. economy, this vision gives a better glimpse of his true ambitions. This is theater, a spectacle of destruction with KSM as the self-cast star, the super-terrorist. KSM concedes that this proposal received a lukewarm response from al-Qaeda leaders skeptical of its scale and complexity. Although bin Laden listened to KSM's proposal, he was not convinced that it was practical. As mentioned earlier, bin Laden was receiving numerous ideas for potential operations. KSM's proposal to attack U.S. targets with commercial airplanes was only one of many. KSM presents himself as an entrepreneur seeking venture capital and people. He simply wanted al-Qaeda to supply the money and operatives needed for the attack while retaining his independence. It is easy to question such a statement. Money is one thing. Supplying a cadre of trained operatives willing to die is much more. Thus, although KSM contends he would have been just as likely to consider working with any comparable terrorist organization, he gives no indication of what other groups he thought could supply such exceptional commodities. KSM acknowledges formally joining al-Qaeda in late 1998 or 1999 and states that soon afterward, bin Laden also made the decision to support his proposal to attack the United States using commercial airplanes as weapons. Though KSM speculates about how bin Laden came to share his preoccupation with attacking America, bin Laden in fact had long been an opponent of the United States. KSM thinks that Atef may have persuaded bin Laden to approve this specific proposal. Atef's role in the entire operation is unquestionably very significant, but tends to fade into the background, in part because Atef himself is not available to describe it. He was killed in November 2001 by an American airstrike in Afghanistan. Bin Laden summoned KSM to Kandahar in March or April 1999 to tell him that al-Qaeda would support his proposal. The plot was now referred to within al-Qaeda as the Plains Operation. The plan evolves. Bin Laden reportedly discussed the Plains Operation with KSM and Atef in a series of meetings in the spring of 1999 at the Al-Matar complex near Kandahar. KSM's original concept of using one of the hijacked planes to make a media statement was scrapped, but bin Laden considered the basic idea feasible. Bin Laden, Atef, and KSM developed an initial list of targets. These included the White House, the U.S. Capitol, the Pentagon, and the World Trade Center. According to KSM, bin Laden wanted to destroy the White House and the Pentagon, KSM wanted to strike the World Trade Center, and all of them wanted to hit the Capitol. No one else was involved in the initial selection of targets. Bin Laden also soon selected 4 individuals to serve as suicide operatives: Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, Khalad, and Abu Bara al-Yamani. During the Al-Matar meetings, bin Laden told KSM that Mihdhar and Hazmi were so eager to participate in an operation against the United States that they had already obtained U.S. visas. KSM states that they had done so on their own after the suicide of their friend Azam, Nashiri's cousin, and carrying out the Nairobi bombing. KSM had not met them. His only guidance from Bin Laden was that the two should eventually go to the United States for pilot training. Hazmi and Madar were Saudi nationals, born in Mecca. Like the others in this initial group of selectees, they were already experienced mujahideen. They had traveled together to fight in Bosnia in a group that journeyed to the Balkans in 1995. By the time Hazmi and Madar were assigned to the planes operation in early 1999, they had visited Afghanistan on several occasions. Khalad was another veteran mujahid, like much of his family. His father had been expelled from Yemen because of his extremist views. Khalad had grown up in Saudi Arabia, where his father knew Bin Laden, Abdullah Azam, and Omar Abdel Rahman, the blind sheikh. Khalad departed for Afghanistan in 1994 at the age of 15. 3 years later, he lost his lower right leg in a battle with the Northern Alliance, a battle in which one of his brothers died. After this experience he pledged allegiance to Bin Laden, whom he had first met as a child in Jeddah, and volunteered to become a suicide operative. When Khalad applied for a U.S. visa, however, his application was denied. Earlier in 1999, Bin Laden had sent Khalad to Yemen to help Nashiri obtain explosives for the planned ship bombing and to obtain a visa to visit the United States, so that he could participate in an operation there. Khalad applied under another name, using the cover story that he would be visiting a medical clinic to obtain a new prosthesis for his leg. Another al-Qaeda operative gave Khalad the name of a person living in the United States whom Khalad could use as a point of contact on a visa application. Khalad contacted this individual to help him get an appointment at a U.S. clinic. While Khalad was waiting for the letter from the clinic confirming the appointment, however, he was arrested by Yemeni authorities. The arrest resulted from mistaken identity. Khalad was driving the car of another conspirator in the ship bombing plot who was wanted by the Yemeni authorities. Khalad was released sometime during the summer of 1999 after his father and Bin Laden intervened on his behalf. Khalad learned later that the al-Qaeda leader, apparently concerned that Khalad might reveal Nashiri's operation while under interrogation, had contacted a Yemeni official to demand Khalad's release, suggesting that Bin Laden would not confront the Yemenis if they did not confront him. This account has been corroborated by others. Giving up on acquiring a U.S. visa, and concerned that the United States might learn of his ties to al-Qaeda, Khalad returned to Afghanistan. Travel issues thus played a part in al-Qaeda's operational planning from the very start. During the spring and summer of 1999, KSM realized that Khalad and Abu Bara, both of whom were Yemenis, would not be able to obtain U.S. visas as easily as Saudi operatives like Madar and Hazmi. Although Khalad had been unable to acquire a U.S. visa, KSM still wanted him and Abu Bara, as well as another Yemeni operative from Bin Laden's security detail, to participate in the plane's operation. Yet because individuals with Saudi passports could travel much more easily than Yemeni, particularly to the United States, there were fewer martyrdom opportunities for Yemenis. To overcome this problem, KSM decided to split the plane's operation into two components. The first part of the plane's operation, crashing hijacked aircraft into U.S. targets, would remain as planned, with Midyar and Hazmi playing key roles. The second part, however, would now embrace the idea of using suicide operatives to blow up planes, a refinement of KSM's old Manila air plot. The operatives would hijack U.S.-flagged commercial planes flying Pacific routes across East Asia and destroy them in mid-air, possibly with shoe bombs, instead of flying them into targets. An alternate scenario apparently involved flying planes into U.S. targets in Japan, Singapore, or Korea. This part of the operation has been confirmed by Khalad, who said that they contemplated hijacking several planes, probably originating in Thailand, South Korea, Hong Kong, or Malaysia, and using Yemenis who would not need pilot training because they would simply down the planes. All the planes hijacked in the United States and East Asia were to be crashed or exploded at about the same time to maximize the attack's psychological impact. Training and deployment to Kuala Lumpur. In the fall of 1999, the 4 operatives selected by Bin Laden for the plane's operation were chosen to attend an elite training course at al-Qaeda's Mes Anak camp in Afghanistan. Bin Laden personally selected the veteran fighters who received this training, and several of them were destined for important operations. One example is Ibrahim al-Thawar, or Nebras, who would participate in the October 12, 2000 suicide attack on the USS Cole. According to KSM, this training was not given specifically in preparation for the plane's operation or any other particular al-Qaeda venture. Although KSM claims not to have been involved with the training or to have met with the future 9/11 hijackers at Mes Anak, he says he did visit the camp while traveling from Kandahar to Kabul with Bin Laden and others. The Mes Anak training camp was located in an abandoned Russian copper mine near Kabul. The camp opened in 1999 after the United States had destroyed the training camp near Khoust with cruise missiles in August 1998, and before the Taliban granted al-Qaeda permission to open the Al-Farouk camp in Kandahar. Thus, for a brief period in 1999, Mes Anak was the only al-Qaeda camp operating in Afghanistan. It offered a full range of instruction, including an advanced commando course taught by senior al-Qaeda member Saif al-Adal. Bin Laden paid particular attention to the 1999 training session. When Salah al-Din, the trainer for the session, complained about the number of trainees and said that no more than 20 could be handled at once, Bin Laden insisted that everyone he had selected receive the training. The special training session at Mes Anak was rigorous and spared no expense. The course focused on physical fitness, firearms, close quarters combat, shooting from a motorcycle, and night operations. Although the subjects taught differed little from those offered at other camps, the course placed extraordinary physical and mental demands on its participants, who received the best food and other amenities to enhance their strength and morale. Upon completing the advanced training at Mes Anak, Hazmi, Khalad, and Abu Bara went to Karachi, Pakistan. There KSM instructed them on Western culture and travel. Much of his activity in mid-1999 had revolved around the collection of training and informational materials for the participants in the plane's operation. For instance, he collected Western aviation magazines, telephone directories for American cities such as San Diego and Long Beach, California, brochures for schools, and airline timetables, and he conducted Internet searches on U.S. flight schools. He also purchased flight simulator software and a few movies depicting hijackings. To house his students, KSM rented a safe house in Karachi with money provided by Bin Laden. In early December 1999, Khalad and Abu Bara arrived in Karachi. Hazmi joined them there a few days later. On his way to Karachi, Hazmi spent a night in Quetta at a safe house where, according to KSM, an Egyptian named Mohammed Atta simultaneously stayed on his way to Afghanistan for jihad training. Midar did not attend the training in Karachi with the others. KSM says that he never met with Midar in 1999, but assumed that Bin Laden and Atef had briefed Midar on the plane's operation and had excused him from the Karachi training. The course in Karachi apparently lasted about 1 or 2 weeks. According to KSM, he taught the 3 operatives basic English words and phrases. He showed them how to read phone books, interpret airline timetables, use the Internet, use code words in communications, make travel reservations, and rent an apartment. Khalad adds that the training involved using flight simulator computer games, viewing movies that featured hijackings, and reading flight schedules to determine which flights would be in the air at the same time in different parts of the world. They used the game software to increase their familiarity with aircraft models and functions, and to highlight gaps in cabin security. While in Karachi, they also discussed how to case flights in Southeast Asia. KSM told them to watch the cabin doors at takeoff and landing, to observe whether the captain went to the lavatory during the flight, and to note whether the flight attendants brought food into the cockpit. KSM, Khalad, and Hazmi also visited travel agencies to learn the visa requirements for Asian countries. The 4 trainees traveled to Kuala Lumpur. Khalad, Abu Bara, and Hazmi came from Karachi. Midar traveled from Yemen. As discussed in Chapter 6, U.S. intelligence would analyze communications associated with Midar whom they identified during this travel, and Hazmi, whom they could have identified but did not. According to KSM, the 4 operatives were aware that they had volunteered for a suicide operation either in the United States or in Asia. With different roles, they had different tasks. Hazmi and Madar were sent to Kuala Lumpur before proceeding to their final destination, the United States. According to KSM, they were to use Yemeni documents to fly to Malaysia, then proceed to the United States using their Saudi passports to conceal their prior travels to and from Pakistan. KSM had doctored Hazmi's Saudi passport so it would appear as if Hazmi had traveled to Kuala Lumpur from Saudi Arabia via Dubai. Khalid and Abu Bara went to Kuala Lumpur to study airport security and conduct casing flights. According to Khalid, he and Abu Bara departed for Malaysia in mid-December 1999. Hazmi joined them about 10 days later after briefly returning to Afghanistan to attend to some passport issues. Khalid had originally scheduled his trip in order to receive a new prosthesis at a Kuala Lumpur clinic called Indolite, and Bin Laden suggested that he use the opportunity to case flights as well. According to Khalid, Malaysia was an ideal destination because its government did not require citizens of Saudi Arabia or other Gulf states to have a visa. Malaysian security was reputed to be lax when it came to Islamist jihadists. Also, other mujahideen wounded in combat had reportedly received treatment at the Indolite clinic and successfully concealed the origins of their injuries. Khalid said he got the money for the prosthesis from his father, Bin Laden, and another al-Qaeda colleague. According to Khalid, when he and Abu Bara arrived in Kuala Lumpur, they contacted Hambali to let him know where they were staying, since he was to be kept informed of al-Qaeda activities in Southeast Asia. Hambali picked up Khalid and Abu Bara and brought them to his home, enlisting the help of a colleague who spoke better Arabic. Hambali then took them to the clinic. On December 31st, Khalid flew from Kuala Lumpur to Bangkok. The next day he flew to Hong Kong aboard a U.S. airliner. He flew in first class, which he realized was a mistake, because this seating assignment on that flight did not afford him a view of the cockpit. He claims to have done what he could to case the flight, testing security by carrying a box cutter in his toiletries kit onto the flight to Hong Kong. Khalid returned to Bangkok the following day. At the airport the security officials searched his carry-on bag and even opened the toiletries kit, but just glanced at the contents and let him pass. On this flight Khalid waited until most of the first-class passengers were dozing, then got up and removed the kit from his carry-on. None of the flight attendants took notice. After completing his casing mission, Khalid returned to Kuala Lumpur. Hazmi arrived in Kuala Lumpur soon thereafter, and may even have stayed briefly with Khalid and Abu Bara at Indolite. Midyar arrived on January 5th, probably one day after Hazmi. All 4 operatives stayed at the apartment of Yazid Sufat, the Malaysian J.I. member who made his home available at Hambali's request. According to Khalid, he and Hazmi spoke about the possibility of hijacking planes and crashing them or holding passengers as hostages, but only speculatively. Khalid admits being aware at the time that Hazmi and Madar were involved in an operation involving planes in the United States, but denies knowing details of the plan. While in Kuala Lumpur, Khalid wanted to go to Singapore to meet Nibras and Fahd al-Qusso, 2 of the operatives in Nashiri's ship-bombing operation. An attempt to execute that plan by attacking the USS The Sullivans had failed just a few days earlier. Nibras and Qusso were bringing Khalid money from Yemen, but were stopped in Bangkok because they lacked visas to continue on to Singapore. Also unable to enter Singapore, Khalid moved the meeting to Bangkok. Hazmi and Madar decided to go there as well, reportedly because they thought it would enhance their cover as tourists to have passport stamps from a popular tourist destination such as Thailand. With Hambali's help, the 3 obtained tickets for a flight to Bangkok and left Kuala Lumpur together. Abu Bara did not have a visa permitting him to return to Pakistan, so he traveled to Yemen instead. In Bangkok, Khalid took Hazmi and Madar to one hotel, then went to another hotel for his meeting on the maritime attack plan. Hazmi and Madar soon moved to that same hotel, but Khalid insists that the 2 sets of operatives never met with each other or anyone else. After conferring with the ship-bombing operatives, Khalid returned to Karachi and then to Kandahar, where he reported on his casing mission to Bin Laden. Bin Laden canceled the East Asia part of the planes operation in the spring of 2000. He evidently decided it would be too difficult to coordinate this attack with the operation in the United States. As for Hazmi and Madar, they had left Bangkok a few days before Khalid and arrived in Los Angeles on January 15, 2000. Meanwhile, the next group of al-Qaeda operatives destined for the planes operation had just surfaced in Afghanistan. As Hazmi and Madar were deploying from Asia to the United States, al-Qaeda's leadership was recruiting and training 4 Western-educated men who had recently arrived in Kandahar. Though they hailed from 4 different countries, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Lebanon, and Yemen, they had formed a close-knit group as students in Hamburg, Germany. The new recruits had come to Afghanistan aspiring to wage jihad in Chechnya. But al-Qaeda quickly recognized their potential and enlisted them in its anti-US jihad. End of chapter 5.2. Recording by Leanne Howlett.